think it has become a confusing season, and therefore when it is confusing, people tend to just stop. When something's confusing, right? What do we have? If someone's driving on the road and I see them all of a sudden just stop in the middle of the street, I can pretty much assume that they're confused about where they're going, right? Because we tend to stop when we're confused. So early on, at least when I was growing up, and maybe some of you the same, it was just all about this contest of, could you pick something to give up for Lent that was hard enough that it made you look good, and that you could do it all the way through until Easter, so that you could say, on Easter, hallelujah, I get to include this into my life again, right? And a lot of times it was food, right? How many of you have ever given up chocolate for Lent? Raise your hand. Okay, one. All right, good. Nobody else? All right. Oh, wow. Meat. Yeah, that's a good one. What was it? Alcohol, I know. My brother used to give up alcohol every Lent, but here was the trick. Then no one wanted to be around him on Easter Sunday. Hammered would be, or up in Boston they refer to it as wicked-handed. With their accents, yeah. So that was the alcohol is always a big one for Lent. Anyone give up something for 40 days that they're very proud of? That they were able to do it without fail, without any kind of, see, I've mentioned to you, I have ADHD, so it's not that I don't have any discipline, it's just that I'm easily distracted. So the hardest thing for me was remembering that it was Friday and that I wasn't supposed to be eating meat on Friday, right? I mean, I'd be in the middle of something and running from one meeting to the next, and this is obviously working for the church, which I've done since I was 20 years old. So I'd be running from everything, and I'd go, and my wife would say to me, did you eat enough? Did you eat something? Because sometimes I then just don't eat, which isn't healthy. So my wife would be like, tell me at least you ate. Yeah, I grabbed something over here. I had tuna fish for lunch, or blah, 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 blah. I said, and then on my way home, I just stopped quick at Burger King. My wife would be like, and what might I ask that you got? Oh, I got a double cheeseburger. She's like, and as she was saying, on a Friday of Lent, I go, oh my God, on a Friday of Lent, right? I mean, so it's just like, then, okay, so now I'm a horrible person. There goes my whole Lent, right? And I think we kind of approach it that way. I've joked for those of you who have been involved in family based here at St. John's, I joke and say, every Lent, I give up coffee. Anybody feel that they could do that? Right? I look and say, I'm a tea drinker. It doesn't matter. I don't drink coffee at all through the year. Do you see how we can do it in a way that then is just kind of, and the idea is of sacrificing something is not, believe it or not, that's why I say, I think we've done it in a way that then is actually the opposite of what it's supposed to be. It's to sacrifice something so that we fill that need with God. I always joke and say there's three, we know there's three disciplines is what they're called. If you ever get quizzed, what are the three disciplines of the Catholic season of Lent? It is prayer, fasting, and almsgiving is the term, right? So basically it's increased prayer time, fasting from something that has moved into our center that is not good for us and that we need to move out of our center. Something that's crept in there. That's what the sacrifice is supposed to be, that I can do without this because really all I need is God in my life. And it causes us to turn to God to be able to say, in order for me to give this up, you need to take over because I'm not going to be able to do that, right? And then the last one is charity, good works, doing positive things in the world. Those are supposed to be the three disciplines of Lent. Now here's the key, is that right? Those are disciplines for a disciple all year long. So all it means is that we're supposed to take it up a notch. We're supposed to take it up a notch. And I always encourage people, that if you get the fast right, everything else follows naturally. Believe it or not. So it's not like we have compartments. Oh, I have to think about what I'm going to do for prayer. Yeah. Then I have to think about what I have to give up. Oh boy. And then I have to think about what I have to do charity, help somebody else out, right? That kind. And don't think about it initially from 3 separate categories. If you get what's moved into your center that needs to be moved out, everything else will fall into place, believe it or not, right? So for instance, maybe it's not food. Maybe it's time on your cell phone. Maybe it's time on your computer. Maybe it's time in video games. Maybe it's time watching TV. Maybe what's crept into your life that you're spending a lot of your time and energy on that isn't helpful for us right now? That would be the question, right? So it doesn't always have to be food. Food doesn't hurt because traditionally, prior to those things that I just mentioned, it was food that was something that we did all day. It should be something that we're doing all day and not just sporadically that we're then giving up, right? So for someone to say, so I love March Madness, right? That's a big thing for me. I'm a big college basketball fan, and therefore March Madness. So one of my traditions is to go with my sons into the Big East tournament at Madison Square Garden in March. Therefore, it always falls during Lent. So, but that's one thing, one event that I go to in the year that celebrates college basketball, whatever. For me then to say, I'm going to do without that. I'm going to do without special one-on-one time with my sons, and I'm going to sacrifice from an event that I enjoy going to that isn't dominating my life in any way, shape, or form, but I'm going to show that I can give it up in order to make God happy. Do you see how I wouldn't recommend that to be something that someone give up? Could I do it? Sure. Would it change my life at all? Absolutely not. Might it even make me a little more resentful come time of, yeah. I mean, we want to be careful that we're not choosing something just to be able to say, look how good I am. Because see, that's doing exactly the opposite. It's supposed to be saying, boy, God, I need you in my life. Giving up, right? As opposed to saying, look how good I am that I gave up whatever. Right? It's putting more. I know people that give up stuff during Lent, they are so arrogant about it. I'm like, I can't imagine how God thinks that's a good thing going on in Lent right now. It's that, I joke anytime I speak in a parish during Lent, I say, I just want to start off by saying, be kind to me because I'm giving up coffee for Lent. And everyone goes, oh. And if I left it there, people would be like, oh, this guy that just gave the talk at my parish, whatever, wow, he's giving up coffee for Lent. How great he must be, right? Well, no, I don't drink coffee. It's totally I'm saying something in order just to make myself look good, right? That isn't what God is after in terms of bringing our relationship closer. So I'm going to encourage us to think about something that has crept into a dominant spot in our life that isn't good. There might be things that have crept into a dominant spot in your life that are good. Maybe you're exercising more. Maybe you're eating healthier. Maybe you're doing those things. To give that up for Lent, again, makes no sense. It's got to be something that we imagine God saying, yes, Dennis. That might be a good start. And as a matter of fact, God also might say, yeah, that's something we're really going to have to do together because I'm not sure you're going to make 40 days without it. Because it's crept into your life in a big way. See? And usually when I describe it that way, I imagine that most of us have that thing pop into our head already. That we then said, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. Something else that looks good, right? But maybe consider whatever it was that popped into your head. I can do without that for 40 days. And here's how I'm going to suggest you approach it. Don't approach it like a New Year's resolution. If the sacrifice of Lent is anything like a New Year's resolution, I'm going to take a wild guess and just say to you, I don't think it's helpful. Just as a blanket statement. Because here's why. it doesn't mean that then if I make 4 days into it and I can't, and I break it, and because I'm here and I say, yeah, no, I didn't do, I didn't realize, went and did this, I said I was going to give it up. No. Look at it, pray about it. That's where the prayer part then kicks in. Take it to prayer. Why was I only able to make 4 days with that? Why is it? Well, because boy, oh boy, I am weak when it comes to X, fill in the blank. Something that's not good for us right now, and we're doing it anyway. And we say, you know what? So you get 4 days in, and you're already blowing, which means, I'm going to say to you, that means you chose the right thing. Then, take it to prayer that night. Start the next day fresh. Start over. Do it again. Try it. Maybe, you know what? And then if you make 5 days, that's 1 day more than the last time. Good for you. You get it to 5 days, you fall back on it, take it to prayer. What? Boy, oh boy, do I need you, God. Because I was only able to make 5 days now. That's putting it in perspective. That's why we have a God. That's why we believe in God. Because we're not. I remind you of this all the time. That's what's gotten me to where I am in terms of my spirituality, is one simple posture. And that is, I believe there is a God, and I'm absolutely convinced that I am not. And I live in between that. This Lent, live in between that. Live in between that. Pick something that, so for me, and I've mentioned this before, those who've been around, I apologize that you're going to say, actually, let me see. Anybody remember what I gave up a few years ago that was really difficult / impossible, and I didn't realize it until I gave it up? And it was because I asked my kids what they thought I should give up. I said, so what do you think? You're thinking about what you might sacrifice from this Lent or whatever like that. I said, I'm thinking about it. What do you think I should sacrifice from? And I was shocked at the answer, because I never would have picked it, because I didn't see it as dominating my life. But meanwhile, my kids, anyone remember the example I gave last year? You ready for this? As silly as it's going to sound. Pepsi. I'm this 6 months pregnant because I like sugary drinks. That's my thing. So now, you're going to gasp. I didn't think anything of it. Because once you have a Pepsi for lunch, but then all of a sudden you go to Panera Bread or you go to someplace like that, and they give you this or Burger King, and they give you just this mega one. And all of a sudden you have to start saying, actually, that I just had 3 in that, right? Because it's the extra large size, right? So I just had 3 in that. So believe it or not, by the time I added up where I was at, I was averaging between, don't you dare judge me, I was averaging between 8 and 11 Pepsis a day. Stop shaming me. And I didn't think anything wrong with it. Obviously my body did, and my doctor did. But, so my kids said, you could never, Dad, you drink it all day long. And because I have ADHD, the caffeine is like Ritalin, by the way. And, if you have any children with ADHD, caffeine and Ritalin are in the same drug, right? So therefore, for someone with ADHD, caffeine actually calms us down. Other people can't drink caffeine before bed or they're up all night. No. For someone with ADHD, it's exactly the opposite. I can drink a Pepsi right before I go to sleep and go right out, right? So I was drinking it all day long. And my kids were like, you're not going to be able to do it. So absolutely I will. Pepsi, I could give it up tomorrow if I wanted to, right? When I tell you, I was probably up there with someone that was a major stage 10 alcoholic. I was beside myself. I was going crazy. I'd take a sip of water and replace it and be like, I'm not talking about something without salt. Drinking something without sugar when you've been drinking sugar your whole... I couldn't find anything that tasted any good. I started getting headaches because I was giving up the caffeine and the sugar on such a quick, after having 8 to 11 of them every day, to then go cold turkey. By Saturday, I was in full, whatever you want to call it, addiction. I was in full-on addiction of going crazy that I couldn't have a Pepsi. And I ended up having a Pepsi because I was not prepared for that at all. But boy, oh boy, it then caused me to, and I went to a priest friend of mine, and I was like, you're not going to believe this, but, I gave up Pepsi for Lent thinking that's what my kids said, and I thought it was going to be a piece of cake. And I didn't make it. I didn't even make it to Sunday from Ash Wednesday, And that's when he said to me, well, don't you dare now just say, all right, well, I didn't do it. Sorry, I'll pick something else now. No, he said, tomorrow you start again. See how long you can make it tomorrow. And I was like, you're going to do this like a 12-step program, one day at a time. One day at a time. And I was like, really? I felt like I was done. I gave it a good shot. I made 4 days, whatever, and then I'm going to, and he was like, oh no, absolutely not. You're going to do, and then I think I made it maybe 5 or 6 days. And then I always say Panera Bread because I remember how specifically I was in front of the fountain at Panera Bread, ready to press the water button, and I was like, with that, like some sort of crazy man. And I went that way, just kept extending it. And then actually I got to Easter, and instead of just being like, thank God that's over, I then had to just say, okay, you know what, this is just not good. And I need to, now here's where it, just to show you. So then I replaced it with iced tea, which my doctor actually said, okay, I'm okay, that's progress. Because the fizzy stuff in the sugar makes it really bad going through your system. So then at least my doctor was like, you know what? For now, and then I went years with sugary iced tea. Snapple, Lipton, whatever. The only good thing was that they don't have those in the fountain, right? So then at least it's not like I was, getting my, addiction. So I use that as an example because now thank God, I'm off. Other than to treat myself every now and then a couple of times throughout the year, I'm off sugary drinks, for good, because I realize now that that's my Achilles heel. That's the thing I need to pray about. Why is it that I'm drawn to that? What is it, and therefore my prayer life got increased, because there were days, lunches and dinners that I was at where there was cans of Pepsi or Coke just sitting on the counter at the event I was at. I was just like, dear Lord from heaven, what are you trying to do to me? I mean, my prayer life kicked in really well during that period of time. Oh my God, was like a regular occurrence for me. Prayer life kicks in. And then, do you know how much money I saved that Lent? You know how expensive a Pepsi is? Giving up 8 to 11 Pepsis a day, I was able to then, I joked and said, I think I was able to support the whole soup kitchen, with a donation as a result of sacrificing. If you get the sacrifice right, your prayer life is naturally going to kick in, because you're going to want to take things to prayer. Why is this affecting me so much, right? And then, it usually, if it was taking up our time, we now have either time, talent, or treasure, money, to be able to give to someone in need. So the almsgiving kicks in naturally then, right? It's not like we have to compartmentalize it. Other churches given me 3 compartments here, and I need to find something in this, and then, we're always doing that. We're fractioning ourselves in our spirituality. Instead, God is looking for us to be more holistic, in my opinion, and from what I understand from our church history and from Scripture. God wants us to be a little bit more holistic about it. So if we can get the thing that we're going to sacrifice, one year, so because I travel a lot, 5 different parishes at a time in the work that I do, and then in the parishes that I was in who could afford me with 4 children, I could never afford to live there. So I always had very long commutes to those parishes because I couldn't afford to live with the people who could afford to pay me. How ironic is that, right? But that was the situation I was in for almost all of my ministry life. Was that the parishes that wanted me and could afford me and were willing to pay me in order to raise my 4 children, I couldn't live anywhere near those parishes because the cost was just too high. So I've always had 45 minutes to an hour commute my entire life from where I live to where I work. And now that I work in 5 separate parishes, that happens all the time now. So as a result, then I also, and I love music, as you can tell, right? So therefore, I would love listening to music in the car. And I thought to myself, while that was a little bit on the, I was more in a sense doing it not because God doesn't like me listening to music in the car, but what it did was that as soon as I got in, it was just like music right on and driving, right? Until the time I turned the car off and got out. It was like it had become a bad habit. Not that music is bad, not that I needed to give up music, but what I wanted to see is, what would I think about if I wasn't listening to music for 2 hours a day? An hour commuting there and an hour commuting home, right? That was awesome for me. That was a great Lent. I gave up music in my car during Lent. And I noticed when the buds first came on trees, I noticed people with little children, I noticed elderly couples holding hands. I noticed things that I never ever would have noticed because I was into my music while I was driving. So while giving that up, I was then able to replace it with prayer time. Where was God taking my mind? Where was God taking my thoughts? Where was God taking me when I was now not filling it with music in my commute? And I love, and that was just awesome. Now, I saved a little bit of money with what I download from Apple Music probably, so it didn't as much fill in that year, the alms giving part, but I was then able to think about, oh, you know what, I need to call my mother-in-law. I haven't talked to her in a while, and I know she's going through a difficult time, right? Or I need to call so-and-so. So while my alms giving might not have been in financial charity, with the extra time that I had, I was able to do some outreach stuff to call people and see how they're doing and stuff like that in the time that I would have normally just been sitting in a car listening to music. You get me? You follow what I'm saying here? So I think we got into a tough period of time seeing Lent as this final exam kind of a thing that we're cramming for to make ourselves look good. How did you do? Did you get an A? Did you get an A+? Did you get a B+ at least, to go into Lent? I would ask you to reconsider that. It's about our relationship with God, the God that's not up there, out there, over there, somewhere, but the God that's right here. First off, the God that's dwelling in each of our hearts, and then the God that's in the relationships that we're in our lives. And how can we make more room for God is what I teach the RCIA folks. How can we make more? We're not getting rid of something to say how good we are. We're sacrificing something to make more room for God. To make more room for the relationships in our lives, right? So what can we do in that to make more room for God? To put God back at the center of our lives. If we can start to think about that as a Lenten journey to the point where then when we get to Good Friday, the question is, how was it dying to fill in the blank? And then sometimes I always joke and say, while we're doing Lent, Lent does us. Which means that sometimes something happens to us during that Lent that forces a sacrifice or forces a situation that we have to address. And then I encourage us to pray through that so that when we get to Good Friday, we say, what are all the things we had to die to this Lent? I'm working with a woman, a family that I was very, very close to in my previous parish. The husband died, and I've been working with them since. They immediately called me, let me know that that he passed, and I was very sad. Just a super, super nice guy. Never missed any of the programs that I ever did in the parish. Was just a great, used to give me some really good feedback. Hey Dennis, you mentioned this, blah, 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 just great while I was the 12 years at that parish. So, I was very sad, but now his wife is lost, She's gonna have a really difficult time, and when she gets to Good Friday, she's gonna realize what she had to die to. She had to die to someone that she was married to for 62 years. She's going to have to die to doing things by herself now, as opposed to doing things with him, which is going to be really, really difficult for her. So if we regain the holistic idea of Lent back, we can not only try to think of things we can do to make for a good Lent experience, good Lenten journey, but then we can be open to things that will happen to us that will make Lent to us because we didn't plan on it. I dealt with someone last year who lost their job in the middle of Lent. Well, there you go. There's a sacrifice. What are you going to do? How are you going to handle that? How, do you still find self-worth in the fact that you're not working in this position or whatever like that? They had to redo their Lent a week in because Lent did them that year, as opposed to them doing Lent. Does that make any sense? So be open to both. Be open to the idea that we're going to try to come up with some kind of a plan with our children as well, encouraging them to just start to look into this, to consider giving up something that will help them journey. So that's why I say many adults are just doing the things that only children should be doing, right? So give a shot at having the kids give up ice cream for Lent. See how they do. Give up their favorite dessert during Lent. And don't replace ice cream with cookies. I always say to them, if you're going to give up ice cream, then, think about giving up ice cream and any kind of a dessert or something like that, right? Or give up, so that's for children. It needs to be, children are concrete thinkers. We shouldn't try to make it esoteric for them. We now understand that things are not always black and white, so we want to leave room for the gray of our Lent, right? That God can be working through the gray as well. So, but for children, they don't get that. So I encourage you to just see if you can't have your child do a prayer every night. They can compartmentalize it, and then as you go through, you can see if you can't help them interconnect it, but they're not going to be able to get that whole concept that I'm going with you right now. So, see if you can just get them something that they're willing to give up, that they think occupies too much of their energy or their, but food does help because you think about it every day, right? And it's not replace, Fruit Loops with Cocoa Puffs, right? I always say, no. If you're going to do that, I've got to give up cereal. See, you got to give up the sugary cereal. You don't want to say, I'm giving up Milky Ways, and instead I'm going to have Snickers, right? Yeah. Again, you want to get them so that it's something that's actually going to be meaningful. But yeah, for our children, we want to see if they can be concrete thinkers. And then you might want to add in Stations of the Cross or something else that comes during Lent that can also act as a prayer experience for the whole family. Praying the rosary or doing something, again, concrete that will help the children to understand this, but you realize that for an adult to just do those kinds of concrete and then in the back of your mind saying, oh, I believe I'm making God happy, hopefully all of us now know as adults that that's not the best way to go about it. I'm not sure that is really making God happy, right? So God is happy when we are most ourselves. Okay? God is happy when we are most ourselves. St. Catherine of Siena. Be who God created you to be, and you'll set the world on fire. It's that simple. Just be who God created to be. So when we look at what are we doing that's keeping us, what has crept into our lives that's keeping us from being who God created us to be, there you have your challenge for Lent. Does that make any sense at all? Yeah? So, when we look at this idea of 40 days of a journey, by the way, I always mention that don't go to your liturgical calendar and try to count from Ash Wednesday to Easter Sunday, and you're going to end up with 47 days. So the number is symbolic, and since it has to do, the season of Lent has most to do with what we now call the RCIA, in the old days called, in the original church, called the catechumenate, which is the bringing of new members in for baptism. There was Don and Kyle, the two members who will be at the Easter Vigil, hopefully here also next month with us in Family Base. But those two candidates who will be baptized will be going to Cardinal Tobin to receive his blessing and become the elect. His elect is what it's called, on the first Sunday of Lent. So that the tradition is anyone that was seeking baptism from their communities needed to go to the bishop in order to become his elect and begin their final period of purification, is what it technically was called. So then when you look at the first Sunday of Lent to sundown on Holy Thursday, that's 40 days. And that would make sense in the early church of them looking at that 40 days as being Lent, because they had to go from when they met the bishop to become the elect until the beginning of the Triduum, which begins at sundown on Holy Thursday. So then it's not like, see, when we're not thinking of Lent in a healthy, holistic way, it can then be, when is Lent done so I can just go back to drinking or eating or whatever, right? Instead, it's the idea that then with all that we learned about ourselves and our God during those 40 days, we actually take it up a notch for 3 days, called the Triduum. From sundown on Holy Thursday to sundown on Easter Sunday, we journey with Jesus to recognize suffering, dying, and rising. Now we're going to do it through the story of Jesus, but the Jesus story is our story. So therefore, what we're going to look at is then, after we've done those 40 days of purification, of trying to make more room for God, then we examine through the story of Jesus' suffering, death, and resurrection. We're going to see where we identify. Where were we betrayed during the season of Lent or in the past year? Just like Judas betraying Jesus. Yeah?
They say 40 days end on Palm Sunday, and then Palm Sunday till Holy Saturday and Holy Week.
So then you can look at it that way as well, right? So that's another way the cultures have looked at the 40 days, is that if you go from Ash Wednesday to Palm Sunday, you're also going to get to 40 days, see? So then you can do, and then looking at Holy Week as a separate there, right? But that would be in the tradition of not looking at it through the eyes of the RCIA, because the RCIA folks don't do anything from Ash Wednesday to Palm Sunday. That's not part of the process there. Their process is first Sunday of Lent through there. Another way that people look at it is they go from Ash Wednesday to Easter Sunday, and since Sunday is the Lord's Day, they skip. They skip all the Sundays and don't make them days of Lent, days of rising, right? But again, and not that any of those are all part of the tradition of the church. At certain times we counted the 40 days this way, other times we counted them this way, other times we counted them this way. The reason why I like the first Sunday of Lent to go back to the original, which would have been the first Sunday of Lent to sundown on Holy Thursday, is because it gives us a 40-day stretch to actually do something, right? I mean, the idea of stopping your fast because it's Sunday, I was thinking, that's a little bit of cheating, right? I mean, that's good. And if that works for folks, it works for folks, right? But not doing 40 continuous days, that's the whole point of doing a retreat, is that it's continuous. That would be like saying, I'm going on a retreat from Friday to Sunday, right? But I'm going to come home for lunch on Saturday, and then I'm going to do whatever, and they're going to go, that's not a retreat, right? Their whole idea is to retreat for a period of time, sit with that period of time, and then go back to your life with what you learned, right? So, but there are different ways of counting the 40. But it's a symbolic number that means completion or transformation, right? And we get that from Scripture. Actually, you get it from a lot of spiritual writings. Christians adopted a lot of stuff that was already existing in spirituality of the time, and they just kind of, Judaism and Christianity is just pulled from the culture, right? It's not that they always just sat lit incense and said, okay, this is how we came up with it. So 40 is in our tradition because we have stories of Noah's Ark, 40 days and 40 nights on the ark, right? You've got 40 in terms of how long the Jewish people spend in the desert after they're freed in the Red Sea by Moses, right? And then you've got Jesus going into the desert just prior to his ministry for 40 days and 40 nights. And he fasts, which is what the story we're going to get. So the first Sunday of Lent, it's the same story, First, this year is Matthew's version. Next year will be Mark's version, because it's like, and the year after that will be Luke's version of the same story. And that is Jesus going into the desert for 40 days. So it's the same story, just told by 3 different gospel writers every first Sunday of Lent. And then we also have another story that's in all 3 of those gospel writers, and that is the story of the Transfiguration. Right? That's what we're supposed to be about during Lent, is allowing God to transfigure us. So Jesus goes up with the 3 apostles up to the mountain, and there they see him transfigured into white. And they're so excited that they don't want to come down the mountain, which is a great story, right? Because once you get good at being in union with God, you don't want that to stop, right? So therefore, there's this story of the Transfiguration. That's the same. This year it'll be Matthew's version. Next year it'll be Mark's version. The year after that will be Luke's version. So it's the same story first Sunday of Lent every year. Same story second Sunday of Lent, just different versions of it. And then this year is my favorite cycle. Cycle A is the original cycle, so therefore it's my favorite cycle. Because then on the third Sunday of Lent is going to be the woman at the well, the story of the woman at the well, who everyone thinks is an outcast, and Jesus is going to make her the first missionary. So if you think you're out, because God has God looks at you and kind of goes like, nope, that's not true. That's the way everyone looked at this woman at the well. But meanwhile, this Samaritan woman was what she's called, right? And instead, she makes such a connection with Jesus that when Jesus says, go, I don't think you're a bad person. I think you're good. She goes in and converts the entire village. In the gospel, she's the first missionary. And we're going to jump to John's gospel. We're going to sprinkle for 3, 4, and 5. 3 unique yet outstanding stories in John's gospel. 3 of my favorite stories in all the gospels, and they actually come from John. They're not anywhere else. They're just in John. The first is that Samaritan woman, so that's on the 3rd Sunday of Lent this year. The 4th Sunday of Lent is the man born blind. Great question that starts out that gospel. Is it his sin or his parents' sin that caused him to be blind? That's how human beings think, right? What did I do wrong with God in order to gain this affliction, that affliction, whatever it might be, right? To which Jesus answers and says, you didn't do anything wrong. I mean, to be honest with you, I'm in a chapel, but I'm a straight shooter, so I'm just going to say, because that's the best way to explain it, is that the idea basically Jesus says, shit happens. It's our world. People are making choices all the time. And therefore, you're going to end up on the negative end of somebody's choices. Don't stop attributing it to God. Stop attributing the negative to God. God is love. When you experience love, you're experiencing God. When you experience anything other than love, it's the mystery. I don't know what you're experiencing, but you're not experiencing God. God's not trying to teach you, trick you, test you, whatever it is we think. And we learn that, God bless you, we learn that in that 4th Sunday of Lent's gospel. The man born blind, because Jesus kind of scratches his head and says, really, that's your question? This poor guy is left blind for the rest of his life. And you're saying, whose sin is it? That he goes, and Jesus says, it's no one's sin. And so that I can show you that it's no one's sin, I'm going to give him his sight back. And by giving him his sight back, he upsets everybody. Because now they don't know what to do with the idea of blaming it on God. Now they start going like, no. That can't be. I was sure that he was a sinner, they start saying. And therefore, that's why he was blind. So now if he's not blind anymore, I have to start saying he's not a sinner? And then they go, that means he was probably never a sinner to begin with. I mean, Jesus traps them in their hard, I call it stinking thinking. Jesus traps us in our stinking thinking. Is the great story of Lazarus. The shortest section of all of the Bible. You know how verses have numbers? So you say chapter and verse. There's chapter whatever. So today, I think, was part of the 5th chapter of Matthew's Gospel was today. And then verse whatever, 36 to whatever, right? I don't know what the exact word, but there's chapter and verse, and it's 2 words. The verse is only 2 words. It's the shortest verse in all of the Bible. And it says, Jesus wept. Jesus cried. It's basically because at the death of his friend Lazarus. And he goes to the tomb and he cries along with everybody else when somebody you love dies. And then he says, but to show you that things don't end in death. No matter what the dying is, the rising's coming. That's our faith. Got to believe that. We got to believe that. We've got to work at it if we don't believe it yet. That no matter what the dying, the rising's coming. If we have the eyes to see. So then you have the week before gospel. We're blind to it many times. We're blind. We think the dying means the end. And Jesus says, no, not the end. And he does it in the story of Lazarus. And he raised Lazarus, who's been bandaged up by the people. That's what you do with a dead body. You bandage it, you put bandages all around it. You've seen a mummy, right? So you put bandages all around it. And it's interesting that Lazarus has a bunch of bandages around him. And what Jesus says when he raises him up, he turns to the rest of the community and says, untie him. Stop looking at him as death. Stop looking at something that you think is an end and see it maybe as a beginning. And it's a great challenge for us for the Sunday before Palm Sunday. And then, of course, on Palm Sunday, we have the first version, we'll get Matthew's this year, of the crucifixion and the passion of Christ. And then on Good Friday, we always get John's gospel version of it. So, Lent, the Sundays have so much in it for us to be able to wrestle with. It's not that the other cycle B and cycle C don't also, but they're not, they were done theme-wise. They weren't done in one theme-wise, where cycle A was done one theme-wise. So, that's Lent in a box, if you want to try to give it to you in a way that can help you then unpack it for your family. Question, comment, Snyder Mark? Nothing, huh?
Just one.
Sure.
You were talking in the basement earlier that sometimes people make bad choices. It doesn't mean that person is bad. They just make the bad choices given the circumstances. Sometimes we have to.
Correct.
Not that we want to,
Right.
but we do it sometimes.
Sure.
Peer pressure.
Yeah, or we think it's the least wrong way of going,
Yes.
right? Sometimes we look at our life and for some reason we come to the conclusion, all these choices stink. I think I'm going to go with the one that stinks the least, right? Sometimes our human gut. And then once we do it, everyone just jumps and says, that was a stinky choice. And meanwhile, the person's going like, I know, I didn't think of a better option, but so go ahead.
No, that's all I'm saying, that sometimes because we make those bad choices, poor choices, and we end up thinking that, I'm a bad person.
Well, that person's a bad
Or
person.
and we
Sure.
judge.
We judge them,
society
absolutely,
judges all the time.
All the
because
time
of
we
the
do.
choices that
Yep.
others make, or I make,
Yep.
or anybody else do.
And I have no problem with what I call morality, which means that was a bad choice. In my humble opinion, that was a bad choice. And here's why. Most of the times we can say, the reason why I think that was a bad choice, because here's how it affected me negatively. Or here's how, for you whom I love, it affected negatively, right? That's right and wrong. Remember last week we did the story of creation, right, of Adam and Eve, right? It's right and wrong is morality. Please go there as often as you want. Naming something good or evil belongs to God. We can't go there. As a matter of fact, that's the tree Adam and Eve are told not to eat of. The knowledge of good and evil. Because when you go believing as a human being, you know good and evil, we've boxed God out. We've boxed God out. Because there's no way for us to truly know. We call it, and here's always my point here, and to prove my point is, we call it Good Friday. Otherwise, we'd have to say it was pure evil. And the church says, no, you can't go there. Because in that expression of bad choices made by the Romans and the high priest and the Sadducees and the Pharisees and all of those Jewish leaders, in that bad choice comes the crucifixion and the cross, but from that cross comes the resurrection. So now we call it Good Friday. Go figure, right? So refraining from labeling things good and evil. Father Richard Rohr refers to it all the time in great church terms. The sacred and the profane. In canon law, that's the way it's referred to, is the sacred and the profane. And yet, we just finished the Christmas story where God chooses to come into the world in a manger. How many people would say, a baby doesn't belong in a manger? And God looks and says, but when I put my son Jesus there, you're going to be singing about it for 2,000 years. Isn't that funny, right? Away in a manger, no crib for a bed. We love that song. You know, who doesn't like away in a manger? That's horrible. That's bad. That's evil to put a baby in a manger, right? And God comes with the message of Jesus to say, once again, just like in chapter 2, in the very beginning of the Bible, I'm going to remind you, stop telling me what's good and evil. I'm God. You're not. You might, I don't see that as anything but evil. I do that all the time, right? But I can't make it come out of my mouth because I'm going to leave that to God. I got to leave that to God. I'm just going to make a choice not to choose that. That's morality. Right and wrong. It's just not labeling it good and evil. And we do it all the time. Mostly, in my experience as being a pastoral minister, I encounter most people who've done it to themselves. Because I made this horrible choice, I'm an evil person. I'm not worthy of God's love. I'm not worthy of God's love. And I look and say, not true with every fiber of my being. Not true. You can't tell me that's true and let me read from this Bible, this lectionary here. There's just no way. We can't read from this and come to the conclusion that because somebody makes a bad choice, it makes them evil. You just can't. The bad choice is a dying that we have to be able to look for the rising in. Because that's the pattern that Jesus comes to teach us. The sacred and the profane do a lot of swapping in the gospel stories. You know, the well that they meet at on the third Sunday of Lent with the story of the woman and that well that they meet at was what they claimed as to not having to go to the temple in Jerusalem. Thousands and thousands of people died fighting over that issue. And Jesus ends up at that well as a Jew talking to a Samaritan and a woman. Therefore, it's all profane. It's all evil if you want to take sides, right? And Jesus goes and says, if you don't mind, could you get me a drink from that well? He says to the woman. And she looks at him like, are you kidding me? You're a Jew, and you belong in Jerusalem, and I'm a woman, and I'm a Samaritan. According to you, you're good and we're evil, and according to us, you're evil and we're good. And Jesus says, not if you look at it from God's perspective. And he gives a couple examples. I mean, it's just so awesome. Just over and over again, the incarnation of God to our earth here is to show us that from God's perspective, it can all be good when all is said and done. And that's crazy talk when you look at some of the stuff going on in our world, right? But none of it is without the Spirit of God if we stay open to it. We just keep making crazy choices. And that's all they are, is wrong, crazy, unloving choices. When we make unloving choices, we're going to be in trouble all the time. But yeah, we've got to stop. That's what the whole point of the church is. The church isn't a gathering of saints. It's a place where sinners come to know that God still loves them. That's why we're here. I'm not here because I'm telling you I'm perfect. I'm far from it. Go interview my family. You know, they'll tell you how imperfect I am. But I still believe I'm tremendously loved by God. And I'm here to tell you, no matter what is going on in your life, that God tremendously loves you. Go be that light, go be that salt. Go be the goodness that God knows you are. And that's how our world, transformation never happens in people by telling them they're horrible. We keep thinking that's the way to do it. I'm going to go up to you and I'm going to tell you what a you are. I'm going to scream it in my car when someone cuts me off, right? And meanwhile, that doesn't cause transformation. Most people double down when they're told they're horrible. They say, oh yeah, I'll show you horrible. That's what the human condition does. But when someone says, you negatively affected me, basically, yeah, you caused hurt in my life. But you know what? I still love you. I still believe you have a positive place in this world. That causes transformation in the look at history. Okay? Questions, comments, no remarks? No, everybody good? All right. Let's go back in. We'll close with a prayer, and then we'll be on our way. All righty? Thanks, everybody.